Hi friends, my name is Aaliyah and welcome to my channel Aaliyah Uncharted. And it is time today for me to wrap up all the books that I read in February and March. I didn't actually get around to a wrap up for February and I'd only read a couple books anyway, so I just decided to smush these two together and talk about them all at once. You get a meatier video that way anyway. So that is the plan. In both February and March, I did participate in month-long readathons. In February, that was the Blackathon, hosted by Jessie at Bow Ties and Books. And in March, that was the Tis the Damn readathon, the Taylor Swift themed readathon hosted by Jan. And so I'm going to have both of their channels linked down below so you can check them out just because they're really awesome content creators and you should check them out. But yeah, so that is the plan for today. I have to admit, February was not a great month for me. I was still pretty slumpy after January, just feeling kind of meh about everything I was reading, not feeling super stoked, which is kind of a bummer. But March really came in clutch. March came in clutch. I have a couple new favorites. So let's just talk about them. All right, so I'm going to start with the books that I read in February. And I'm not going to get into any challenges or anything for the readathon because I made other videos with that stuff. So you can check out my TBRs if you really want to know more. But we're just going to get into what I actually finished. The first book I finished was The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett. And this was chosen for me by my beautiful friend Devin for my 12 Recs from 12 Friends challenge. And I talked about that in my goals video, which I will also have linked down below for you to check out. So this is a story about twin sisters who come from a town, a family and a town that are, I wouldn't say they're known for, but they have very light skin. They are all black folk, but they are very light skin and can easily pass as white. And so we have these twin girls whose names I do not remember. I don't remember the characters' names in this, but they go in vastly different directions. One of them ends up marrying a very dark-skinned black man and having a daughter with him. And then the other marries a white man and passes as white and never has any contact with her family or anything again. So we're following the stories of the two of those sisters and then of their respective daughters and how their stories kind of collide. It's a big commentary on race, but also colorism and I guess internalized racism and a bunch of other things, family dynamics, all that jazz. So I gave this 3 stars. And I think one of the big things that turned me off of this was the fact that it's historical fiction. And I did not know it was going to be historical fiction when I read this. I mean, I knew that there would be a historical element to it since we're following 2 generations of women, but even the more modern one takes place in like the 80s. So like it's still historical fiction. And the sisters' timeline was in like the 50s. So that was like one of the biggest things that kind of turned me off of this, is just because I don't like historical fiction. That is not really my jam. And so that was just really unfortunate and not a fault of the book. That's just not something I would have picked up normally. I did really like the different commentary on race and colorism and stuff like that. I think it was done really well. But I got bored. That just sounds bad. I think it's a very slow moving character driven story, which generally I like, but I mean, when you have 4 points of view, you inevitably care about some more than others. And so when we were following certain people, I didn't care. I don't know. I thought it was very interesting. I did really appreciate the inclusion of a transgender man in here. I did not know that was in here, but I appreciated it. There were some things, I'm not Own Voices here, and I haven't taken the time yet to look into Own Voices reviews on that part of the book. But considering the time in which it was set, I think the way that it was described was probably pretty accurate. But again, take that with a grain of salt because I am not trans. So all this being said, I think it was fine. This is one of those books where I can notice and I can recognize the merit of it. I understand why so many people really, really enjoy this. it is just not my style of book. I don't tend to like a whole lot of literary fiction or historical fiction, so this was destined to not be a favorite. It's a good book. It's a well done book. I just cared about some people more than others, and I didn't care for the overall setting. And so it's like a, not the best fit, but still a decent book. You know what I mean? The second book I read in February was The Sweetest Remedy by Jane Igharo, and this is a contemporary story about this woman named Hannah. She is mixed race, and she has a white mom and a Nigerian father, but she only met her father like once, so she's not really connected to that part of her heritage. That changes when her father dies, and she ends up getting invited to the funeral. So she flies to Nigeria to meet her father's family, and it's just a lot about like family dynamics and that kind of stuff. And there's also a subplot with a man that she meets in the States who she ends up meeting again in Nigeria because he's actually fairly connected to her father's family. So the problem is this is pitched as a romance, and it's not a romance. It's just not. It's a contemporary story with a romantic subplot, but it is not a romance. And I think that marketing really did this book a disservice because the different discussions it was having about family dynamics, about blended families, about how to relate to people you're related to when you've never actually met them before. Just a lot of really interesting themes that I think could have been explored better if there wasn't also a subplot, like a romance that felt like it was kind of pigeonholed in. It ended up being, it felt out of place. Like I can understand a romantic subplot, but I think the thing that jarred me is there's a difference between having a romantic subplot and also writing a romantic subplot in the style of a romance, if that makes sense. Like, you could tell this book was trying to be a romance, but also leaning so heavily on the non-romantic plot line that it was just, it wasn't the same. And so you've got your different beats and writing style and stuff that you associate with romances, but within a contemporary, it felt like a weird mix of things that didn't blend very well together. And I think it would have done better if either it was a straight up romance with a minor family plot, or if the author had just focused on the family plot line, because it was really interesting. And I was far more invested in how Hannah was going to relate to all of her half siblings and figure out her place in this new family than I ever was in the romance that was, again, it felt out of place. I gave this 3.5 stars. Again, I mean, it was enjoyable to read, and I was really invested in just how she was going to build this new family, but the romance and how it didn't fit, and it was just off-putting, and it made it weird. It felt like I was jumping between two books while I was reading it. It was very strange. So I would recommend this book. Just don't go in thinking it's a romance, because it's not. So that's about all I can say. I think it was a good book. I really liked what it was talking about, but it really did a huge disservice marketing as a romance. The last book I read in February was We Ride Upon Styx by Quan Berry, and this was my Buzzword Reading Challenge pick for February. The theme was pronouns and stuff, so that would be the we in this case. And this is also a historical fiction, technically, although it's so weird that it doesn't feel like a straight up historical fiction novel, which is probably why I liked it better than I did like The Vanishing Half. So this book takes place in the 80s, and we are following a high school field hockey team from Salem, the original location for the Salem witch trials. And there's just, the plot is following this field hockey team as they are trying to work their way to state to like win the state championships. The thing is, this team sucks. And so they end up maybe having a little bit of magical assistance to guide their way to state. And so this is just a very strange book because you have magic, maybe. It's still very vague about whether what they're talking about is real or whether it's kind of like this thing that they talk about. What I really liked about this was the narrative structure was really interesting. It is all told in the first person plural, so it's we did this, we did that. Although it does talk in the third person about specific characters, but it's like you're reading from like the hive mind, the like collective history of the team. So like they'll talk about the goings on of a certain person, but then it's like, but then we did this, we decided we wanted to X, Y, or Z. It was just very interesting. Definitely nothing I've ever seen before. And I thought it was a cool device to really lean into the weirdness of like, are they all like, did they all sell their souls to some demon? Did they like, do something to like all of a sudden have like this collective, like did they become the Borg? I don't know. Like it's very strange, but also just really interesting and cool. The thing I had with this is I was interested, but I was also bored at the same time. It took me a lot longer to get through this than I wanted to. It does move very slowly, because it's meant to be like a slow buildup of having this magic or whatever it is, just build up over time and requiring more and more from the team. And sorry, there's a wasp at my window and that was distracting. There were times where I wanted the pace to pick up a little bit. The pace was fairly slow. So I guess know that going in. I ended up giving this one 3.5 stars because again, it was so different and interesting, but I couldn't say if I liked it or not. You know what I mean? Like I would recommend it to people who like weird and interesting things, but I can't say I like actively liked it, but I also didn't actively dislike it. I think I was more intrigued by the whole thing. I was intrigued by its existence more than I like actively liked it, if that makes any sense. So if you want something weird, check this one out. Okay, so now on to March. And so after February was kind of lackluster, very middle of the road, average, bleh, I really wanted to read a book that I knew I was going to love. Like I needed something to just make me like super jazzed about reading again. And so I picked Winter's Orbit by Everina Maxwell. This was a 5-star prediction. I will have that video linked down below. And so I had a very good feeling that I was really going to love this book. So I figured that would be a really good place to start to try to get out of this reading slump. And let me tell you, this was a 5-star prediction, but even then, it exceeded expectations. I loved this book. I loved it so much. And I don't read very quickly in print, but this is one of the first times in a long time that I have just been like glued to my reading chair wanting to read, being like, who is Sleep? I don't know her. Who is anything? I don't know her, because I just want to spend all of my time reading this book. It was just exactly what I needed. And I'm so, so happy I finally got around to it because it was so good. Let's get into plot. So this is a science fiction novel, and following 2 points of view, we have Prince Kiem, who is an imperial prince. He doesn't have a very great reputation and he's known to be a bit of a playboy. He just kind of likes to play around. And then we're also following Janin, and Janin is a recent widower. His husband was another imperial prince. He was Prince Kiem's cousin. So the other prince's death has come at a very bad time because there are a lot of politics at play. Treaties need to be signed that were really banking on Janin and his husband, but now that's gone, and there's a lot of possible implications of potential intergalactic war because of it. So that's not great. So what the crown decides to do is have Janin and Kiem marry as like a marriage of convenience, political marriage situation to try to rectify that so that there is no war. Thing is, Janin and Kiem are very, very different people and don't really know if they like or trust each other, but for the sake of, peace and not war, they, try to come together and figure things out. But then things start getting a little shifty because Janin's dead husband's cause of death turns out to be a little sketch. And so now they're trying to solve the mystery of what was going on and was he murdered. There's a whole lot going on in here, but this is a male-male romance that is just chef's kiss. Beautiful. I loved it so much. Like, this book made me giddy. Whew. So there are so many things I loved about this book. First of all, plot was excellent. World building was super cool. I really loved the different planets, and I just hit my camera. Cool. Love that. I just hit my camera, so my position might be a little off, but anyway. I really loved the setting for this. Just the world that was created and the different politics involved were really, really cool. Also, homophobia and transphobia does not exist. Like, it's just all genders, all sexualities is commonplace, which we love. I also really liked the pacing of this. It was the perfect balance of, you know, fast-paced plot of like things are happening, tension is rising, but then also slows down enough to allow for character development and for relationship development, both between Kiem and Janen and with other characters as well. So I really loved just how it was all built together. Obviously, my favorite part of this is going to be the characters. Janen and Kiem are my children. I love them so much, and I felt for them so hard for like different reasons, and I love them. So I cannot recommend this book enough. Clearly, it was 5 stars. I am in love with this. I wouldn't be surprised if I wanted to reread it fairly soon. Really quick though, there is trigger warnings for domestic violence in this, so know that going in. If you need more detail, I'm sure there's stuff on Goodreads and stuff, but just so you're aware, because I did not know that was going to be a part of this whole thing, just know that going in. But honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if this is on my favorites of the year, because I loved it that much. Next up, we have The Paris Apartment by Lucy Foley. This was my Buzzword Reading Challenge pick for March. The theme was location names, so that would be Paris in this case. And I also buddy read this with my mom, which was fun. This is a mystery novel following a woman named Jess. She is kind of running from her life in London. Bad things went down. She doesn't want to be there anymore. So she calls up her brother Ben, who lives in Paris, and says, hey, can I stay with you for a bit? And pretty much leaves at that same moment. So it's a bit impromptu. So she shows up in Paris at Ben's apartment, and he's not there, which was weird because she knew he knew she was coming. And so it was really out of character for him to just like not be there and not show up. So things are a little weird. She's getting a little suspicious, and it doesn't help that all the other people who live in this apartment building are sketchy as heck. Like, there is just something going on that you feel like they gotta know something. And so this story follows Jess, and then we also get points of view of all the other people who live in the apartment building to figure out what happened to Ben. Did something happen to Ben? Where did he go? Is this something sketchy, or is this just like some weird misunderstanding? There's a whole lot of just spookiness. I feel like spooky is a good way to describe the atmosphere in this book, because it is definitely very spooky. So I give this book 3 stars. I think it's a fairly average mystery novel. I realize that this is probably not my type of mystery novel. I think I tend to like more procedural stuff than just like the average person playing Scooby and Shaggy and solving a mystery. So it wasn't like my favorite kind, but I will say, again, the atmosphere was immaculately done because we're in Paris. It feels very spooky. It feels very just like tense. The tension was kind of stagnant the entire time. Like, there wasn't building tension, but the tension was there from the get-go. Like that was definitely just like the status quo of things. Like, it was just tense, period. So the characters were also really interesting to follow. Lucy Foley's pretty good at creating characters who think they're good people, but they're not. Like, they're all very flawed characters, but they also think that they are good themselves. And so it's just, they're interesting to follow. You can't root for any of them. Like, they all kind of suck. But you're more invested in the resolution of the story than you are in rooting for any character in particular. So that was pretty cool. That being said, I mean, again, I think it was pretty average. The thing, like, there was just a lot of suspension of disbelief that I couldn't get on board with, particularly when it's like, why don't they just tell her to leave? Like, they could literally just kick her out of the building and then there wouldn't be anything else going on. Like, they could just kick her out. So, I mean, just like things like that where I'm like, I feel like this definitely would go differently in real life, but I know there's an aspect of suspension of disbelief when it comes to mystery novels, so I don't think that's going to bother most people, because from what I can tell, a lot of people really love this book. It was a little too much for me. So it was kind of middle of the road, but I'm glad I read it. If nothing else, then to just be on the hype train for it. The next book I read was The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea by Axie O, and this is a YA fantasy retelling of the tale of Shimchong. And that is a Korean folktale, sometimes also known as like the Bride of the Water God or the Bride of the Sea God. Just a very lovely folktale. And so this is a reimagining of that, kind of. We're following a girl named Mina, and she lives in the same village as Shimchong. And this village, or even just this country, the whole homeland, has been suffering from really terrible storms for like 100 years. Or even hundreds of years. It's been a long time. It like devastates agriculture. It is just really terrible. And so every year the village will sacrifice a young, beautiful maiden to be the bride of the water god or the sea god. I can't remember which one they use. We're going to say sea god. And so they're hoping that they'll find the true bride of the sea god. And in doing so, the sea god will stop all of the destruction and devastation that the storms cause. So Shimchong is slated to be the next bride of the sea god, but she has a relationship with Mina's brother, and Mina doesn't want that heartbreak to happen, and so she sacrifices herself in Shimchong's stead. And so she travels to the spirit world in hopes to find the sea god and figure out a way to stop all of the terrible storms. Now, this book was just magical. It was so lovely. This is talked about as really good for people who like Spirited Away, and for real, if you like Spirited Away, read this book. If you like Miyazaki films at all, read this book, because there were times I felt like I could envision scenes, like whole scenes or the whole book as a Miyazaki movie, because it has those vibes. It really embodies those vibes. We have Mina in the spirit world meeting different kinds of monsters and creatures and gods and stuff like that. And it's just a very whimsical story. It's like just a really nice fairy tale. And I enjoyed the heck out of this. It was so wonderful. I will say I wish there was a little bit more development between Mina and her love interest, but I still really liked them. So it's not like there wasn't enough, but I would have liked to see more. I wanted to see more. And I also would have liked maybe a little bit more from the ending, but it's more that, it's like your typical fairy tale ending, in that like it's like, and then we're done, but I want to know what happens after. So that's like my only gripe about this, but overall I just really enjoyed this. It was such a fun time. It was just like, it felt like I was on a cloud. It was just very whimsical and nice, and I highly recommend this. I gave it 4 stars. Read it. Next up we have More Myself by Alicia Keys, and this is Alicia Keys' memoir. This was recommended to me by my friend Caitlin for my 12 Recs from 12 Friends challenge. And we know that I'm not a big memoir person, but I will say this is probably hands down the best audio memoir experience I have ever had, because Alicia narrates it herself, also has like clips of music and her playing piano and singing and stuff, but then also has cameos from the people that she's talking about in her book, which is super cool. So like you actually hear the voices of her mom, of her husband, people she's worked with, Bono, like they're all like doing little cameos and stuff, which is super cool. It was just a totally different thing than I've ever heard before. Really, really cool. So if you're at all interested in this book, I highly recommend the audiobook. Anyway, I mean, there's not a whole lot to say in terms of plot here because it's just a memoir, but it was really interesting to learn more about Alicia Keys because I didn't actually know a whole lot about her. I never really listened to a whole lot of her music, but you know, she came on the scene while I was growing up, and so I know a lot of her classics, and I've really liked a lot of like the big ones that you would hear on the radio, you know, like No One, Empire State of Mind, etc. But I didn't really know a whole lot about her as a person, so that was really interesting to learn about. Like I'm never going to listen to Empire State of Mind the same way just because now I know so much of the backstory, so like that was really, really cool. There are just a lot of things I didn't know about her, especially her really big push on philanthropy and her very strong spiritual nature, and she's just a woman with a lot of conviction and stuff, so I have a lot of respect for her. But not that I didn't respect her before, but I have a lot more respect for her now, which I guess is maybe not the point of memoir, but a very nice side effect of just like learning more about people. So I gave this 3.5 stars, which is not a bad rating. Like I actually really enjoyed this. I was not bored reading this. It was something I was interested in. So again, if you're at all into audiobooks, highly recommend this one. It was just a very, very cool experience, and made me maybe consider looking into more like musician or celebrity memoirs, because maybe I'll like them more. So thank you, Alicia. But yeah, I thought it was pretty good. The last book I read was The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. And now, full disclosure here. This was on my March TBR, but I was not planning on reading this book. I didn't think it was going to happen because I have been intimidated by this book for the longest time because everybody has loved it. Everybody raves about the Broken Earth trilogy, and it's just supposed to be this really big brain sci-fi fantasy novel, like won the Hugo Award, like just bananas, right? And so I was intimidated. It's long. It's supposed to be very complex, and I thought it was just going to be too much for me. So I wasn't sure if this was actually going to happen, but my dad recommended it to me. It was my 12 Recs for 12 Friends choice for my friend Amber. I had to read. I just had to just do it. And I loved it. And I'm mad. I'm mad that I waited so long, that I was so hesitant, because by God, the hype is warranted. So how are we going to explain this book? The fifth season is part of the Broken Earth trilogy, and it is called that because the Earth itself is very volatile. So there are lots of earthquakes and natural disasters that happen frequently. But then the worst are called seasons. And what the seasons are is like total devastation events, right? Like nearly like extinction events, right? Nearly wipes out the human race every single time. There have only been a few. Somehow humankind keeps going, but it's always a near thing. So that's kind of the world that we're in. The book follows 3 points of view, although I would say the main one is Asun. She is a woman in her 40s-ish. She comes home to find her son has been killed and her daughter has been kidnapped by her husband. And so the book is her trying to find her way to her daughter, kick the living daylights out of her husband, and just figure out a way to survive, because a season may or may not be on the horizon. So there are also 2 other points of view, a girl and another woman who's a bit younger, like in her 20s or something. And I'm not going to get into all of it because I will be talking for 10 minutes just on plot alone, and my voice already hurts. I've been talking for an hour and a half, so we ain't got time for that. So all this being said, the world is complex. It is very intricate, and I think it was beautifully mastered by N.K. Jemisin. there's a whole lot going on both in the world and also just the themes that are going on in here. There's a lot about oppression, a lot about just how complacent people can get when they're comfortable, a lot about kind of colonization, and just a lot of other things. And so there's a lot here. But the wonderful thing, and the thing I wish I had known before I waited so long to read this book, is that it is very accessible. I think that the writing, while really interesting and different, is also really easy to read. It's very compelling, it's compulsively readable. It's not hard to get into, I don't think. If you're not into hard sci-fi or fantasy, it might still be difficult, but if you are, but you're still intimidated, don't be. It is easy to read. It's not got like highfalutin language or anything. So I found that very reassuring, and it made it so much easier once I figured that out to keep reading, because again, there's so much going on. You want to keep reading to know what the heck is happening. I also really enjoyed the characters. Alabaster's my favorite. I love him and I want to shield him from the world, but I really loved him. And then also Cyanite was really interesting to read from. I really liked her points of view, probably the most. She was the one that I liked the most. And I'm just really interested to see where the story's going to go from here, because that last line took me out. I didn't know what to do with that. It was a lot. And I was like, what the? So we're going to see how it goes. I am very excited to continue with this series because there's so much and I can't stop thinking about it. I've just been thinking about it ever since. That is the 5th season. I will say, check the trigger warnings, because this is a brutal world. There was a specific scene that was very hard for me to get through, but it was so good. I mean, there is going to be stuff like violence in here and just a lot of different things. So check the trigger warnings, but also know that it's not gratuitous. It's not unnecessary. I think it's fairly necessary for understanding the world and the context in which a lot of these things happen. So I guess know that. All that to say, I gave this 5 stars, obviously. I loved this book. I'm very much looking forward to the Obelisk Gate. I have no idea what to expect now, because now I'm just like, there are 2 more books. How? And I am intrigued. So anyway, I feel like that's all I can say, because otherwise it's either this or this, and we ain't got time for this. So we're going to stop it there. All right, so that is all I read in February and March. February was a so-so month, but March really came in clutch and redeemed my reading for the year so far. So I'm very happy about it. I have a couple new favorite books, tackled some intimidating reads and books outside of my comfort zone, and just generally feeling really good about my reading, which is really great. It makes me really excited for what I have planned for April. So it's all good, and I'm happy about it. I would love to know a book that you read recently and loved, so hop down to the comments and let me know. And while you're down there, you can hit that like button and go ahead and hit that subscribe if you want to see more from me. But that's all I've got for you guys today. Thank you so much for stopping by and hanging out with me. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye. Staring out the window, reaching for a North Star, waiting just to wake up from this nightmare where you could be right back in my arms, dancing to the limit.